Today, we are going to be talking about vendor portal, what vendor portal is, the benefits of it, the return on investment you could expect to see within your organization with regards to using a vendor portal. And just before we get started today, I just want to let you know that we have a dedicated vendor portal offer that is for all our customers adding it to their plans this year. So we have a dedicated vendor portal offer for customers adding it to their plan this year. So please just look out for an email from your CSM this week with more details about that. But before we get started, I just want to talk about what is a vendor portal. And I know that many of you, if you've been working in procurement, vendor management, even legal and finance, you've probably come across this idea. So the way we see the vendor portal here at Gatekeeper is it's your digital front door for your vendors to access and to work with your organization. So we see it as a centralized entry point for your vendors to interact with you, enabling secure collaboration, data sharing, task management, all of that good stuff that without a vendor portal is usually done via disparate apps, email, spreadsheets, Slack messages, phone calls. And I'm not saying that all of that has to go away. They've absolutely got their place. But we all know that as soon as you're trying to manage onboarding, due diligence reviews, SLA management, contract obligations, it is very difficult. And James, just at this point, just on that notion of it being a digital front door for your organization, I think you're just going to show off a couple of ways in which your vendors can access the vendor portal through Gatekeeper.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I want to call out that we wanted to show these different entryways because someone did ask us in the sign up form for this webinar that they were interested in, how do vendors get access to the portal? Because there's not just one way. We've built a few depending on how scalable you want to make your processes. So one of the most scalable, but light touch from your perspective is when you have a vendor portal, what you can do is make access to it available just via a link like this. So for instance, in my Gatekeeper environment here, I have a vendor portal. It's called supplier portal in the URL, but ignore that. But what I've enabled is the ability for vendors, obviously they can come here and log in if they've already previously accessed the account and they've got ongoing activities with you. But if you share this link, what you can enable for your portal is the option for any new vendors that want to do business with you. You can just share that link with them and say, hey, if you're considering working on this project with us, or if you want to get set up, they can come here, hit register, and start filling in their details. And I'll show this towards the end because some of the checks that we had that go on here are really cool, and they automate a lot of the initial data collection from the vendor users. But there's an element of two-factor authentication and stuff like that I don't want to spend too long at the outset on the very first thing we show on screen, like jumping around emails and so on. But from here, yeah, vendors can put in their email, validate that it's a real email address and that they have MFA, and then using our Clearbit integration, which is what we call auto build at Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper will pre-populate their vendor details for them, but also allow them to flesh out extra information that makes its way into your system. So just by sharing a link like this one with any prospective vendor that you have, any prospective vendor or partner that you have, basically they can be doing all of that initial setup of their vendor metadata and their user account, obviously, so that they can interact on future processes without you having to do anything, really. So that's the really scalable way, a public access link where vendors can set themselves up. But one of the ways that we'll probably talk a little bit about in today's session when we're talking about vendor onboarding, I've just been logged out, probably haven't logged in long enough, is automated invites to vendor users. So the way that I prefer personally to get vendors into your Gatekeeper account, into their portal, is when you only at the point that you need them. So that example was one where any prospective vendors can sign up when they want to on their own time. But this workflow, and if you've attended previous webinars that Daniel and I have done, this is our best practice vendor onboarding template that follows a fairly structured process of internal users will say they want to work with the vendor. There'll be some initial approval and onboarding checks, but at the point that the card reaches the stage here, this phase with some cards on it already, that basically implies you've decided you do want to work with the vendor and you want to get them onboarded. This, when a card lands here, this will send out an email to that vendor. I think I've got it on one of my tabs here. I have quite a few tabs open. It'll send them an email like this to say, hey, welcome to the Gatekeeper vendor portal. It'll give them some context as to why they're being invited. And you can also embed links to documents or videos and, contact details and guidance. And from this email, they can hit activate account, and that will take them into the vendor portal And like I said, pragmatically at the point that they're needed. So for instance, when a user then logs in and they'll get to a dashboard like this one, just let me refresh to make sure I haven't been logged out for a timeout here as well. Nope. And so when they land in a vendor portal, this is the sort of view that they'll get. Obviously, a brand new vendor will probably have far fewer forms open because they'll hopefully just have like a vendor onboarding to do. But this is someone, James Asana, in this case, who works for Asana, who's been interacting with the portal for a while. So he's got other processes, which we'll get to in a little bit when we talk about the different ways that vendor portal delivers ROI. But once they land in the portal, they'll be given a central hub of here are all the structured workflow processes they're interacting with. Here are some maybe ad hoc tasks or events that they have assigned to them, and also here are any communications they have, which harkens back to what Daniel said around disparate apps. Like what you sort of want to avoid is, especially if you're managing lots of vendor relationships, is managing lots of emails or maybe Slack messages, WhatsApp messages, Teams messages, and then someone saying, well, when did you last communicate with them? And you'd have to go and check all those different places. If you're communicating with them during processes, like the workflows that we'll see in a bit, they'll be able to see that in the central hub here as well.
Perfect. Awesome. And we will show way more of this. So just before we get started, I just want to make it clear as well that the vendor portal is an additional module for Gatekeeper. It's probably just something that I just want to highlight at the start there. But we're going to move on to one of the areas which a vendor portal helps you with a return on investment if you were to add the vendor portal to your Gatekeeper setup. And this is actually my favorite one. I used to be a Gatekeeper customer. I used to use the vendor portal. I used to use it and embed it within all of my vendor workflows. And my primary aim with it was this idea of perfect vendor data. So we all know that we need to get clean and usable data from our vendors. And we need this because it helps us understand who our vendors are. It's like a know your vendor check. So we know we're working with real vendors. We're not working with any fraudulent vendors. And we know this at the outset. We also get to understand their risk posture, their risk management strategies and things like that, whether that's through the documentation they provide or the certificates they have or the questions they answer. We can also get things like payment info, tax info, and the correct points of contact up front. And then James briefly showed there on the My Open Events, you can track certain things like obligations, contractual obligations, that is, meeting requests or ad hoc requests that way. Mm-hmm. So the return on investment of getting vendor data right here is savings opportunities. This is a really big one. And this is one way in which myself and the team that I was part of used vendor portal, is that we were able to use this as our way to build our approved vendor list. And from there, we were like, oh, actually, we've got a lot of consolidation options here. We've also got a lot of ways to collaborate with these vendors. We can work directly through the portal with them. We could either work to negotiate better deals or to get rid of them altogether, or to find new local vendors in the instance that we went for that were just more competent and lower rates. And we were able to obtain a lot of that information through having really good vendor data. And just on that note of having good data, you can quickly find it and access it at any time. And that's anyone in your organization. And then there's the kind of obvious one with this, but having all of this good data, having good processes that get you good data saves a huge amount of time. So teams no longer have to spend ridiculous amounts of times trapped in emails and spreadsheets. You can really start to actually manage the relationship with your vendors, the performance of your vendors, and also that post-signature contract management piece. We can stop value leaking from our contract. So if we secured savings, we can actually realize those savings as we better manage them. And just, additionally, what we've also seen from some of our customers using vendor portal is that it's actually giving them new data that they wouldn't have been able to obtain via a spreadsheet or email. That actually is then letting them work with new customers. So they're able to source information throughout their supply chain and then use that in bid details and new bids for work and win new business. So it's a really a huge value enabler. So a vendor portal can help us get all of this vendor information, keep it up to date with minimal effort. So for me, it's really important. I know James really likes it as well. And James, we're going to show some of the ways in which we can get some of this data. So I'm going to kind of hand over to you here and let you talk through that part.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I did see a story because we get feedback from customers in quite a few different channels at Gatekeeper. And I did see an interesting story that one of our customers did say that based on information they got through processes like this via their repository, like running reports for them was just now a few clicks. So when requests came in from their internal teams, previously it would either be something that they literally couldn't find information on, like you said, they just weren't able to gather the data because they didn't have the people on the team to spend time on it, or gathering the data would have been a really, soul crushing and laborious task to
Painful.
get done. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but now it's all there in the repository because they got it from the vendors via these forms, and it was just there for them to cut up how they wanted and export it and work from there. But yeah, so over to that data point where you're mentioning collecting the information. So I'm logged into this vendor portal here, and just as an FYI, some of you might have noticed Gatekeeper's gone from orange to blue. I've done that intentionally because one, I'll be jumping between regular internal Gatekeeper that a lot of people on the call will probably see because you'll access the full version of Gatekeeper, and I'll be jumping across the vendor portal, but also just to highlight that you can brand it differently depending on how you want your vendors to experience the portal. But it's just a minor note in case any of you are confused as to why it's blue here and orange in the other environment. It is still the same Gatekeeper, it's just this is my vendor portal. But yeah, over to that perfect data. So this, when a vendor user is logged in, if they have that vendor onboarding form that they've been involved in, what they'll see is the ability to hit update this form. And like you said, Daniel, like you're able to collect any information that you need from that vendor then directly in Gatekeeper. So here's like, there's quite a few different numbers of form sections here. I'm not going to go through all of these. Don't worry. This isn't going to be like a how to perform onboarding and due diligence session, but we have a mixture here of, basic vendor information, like the vendor core details, like tax IDs, registered addresses, and so on. Maybe some due diligence assessments like GDPR, modern slavery, ESG, and, operational security and so on. And then, maybe even finance details like banking details and so on. And actually, I've realized I haven't actually got anything in here. So I'll put example bank, just so we know that when I complete this assessment, where that information makes its way. And when the vendor, either working alone or having invited their own colleagues into the portal, when they've all filled out what they need from this form, hitting submit will then move that card that was assigned to them at that stage of the workflow that we saw earlier onto the next stage, probably to your internal users to complete their assessments. And also the Gatekeeper processes based on what the vendors have put directly onto your workflow. And as you can see, I actually did change this workflow up slightly from the standard process where you would want that to go through some extra approval steps. But for speed on this, in this environment, I just had it so that once the vendor submitted their details, it auto completed the process. But I wanted to do that so I can navigate back to Gatekeeper and open up the vendor record. And what we'd be able to see is that information that was provided by that vendor user, such as the standard vendor details, and hopefully example bank has made its way into here as well, is accessible now directly in the repository based on just having sent the vendor that, invitation email saying, we're onboarding you, we want to collect, basic information about your company and due diligence information. It's all available there in the repository. Where I think this is also gets cooler is, like Daniel said, you're not able to just collect data, you're able to collect more advanced information like compliance documentation. So if you have it as part of your onboarding forms that you want vendors to attach things like their regulation certificates and things like that, you can capture that there. And one cool thing in workflows, if you're close to our product releases, is that recently we updated the ability to collect not just expiry dates for these certificates. So if I want to be able to make sure I'm keeping these documents up to date, which we'll come to later, you can also capture information such as the file type. So if I want to make sure that I'm easily able to see what are my accreditations for this vendor and, what are their policy documents, they can capture that on the workflow form as well. So all of that, again, the data in the repository and the files that are there can be accessed by, as Daniel said, any user that can see this vendor based on just information that was provided by the vendor themselves. There was no need to send them emails and chase them. And then when they respond, get all those emails back and then copy them across to some other system. It's just invite them into the portal, get them to fill out their information, and it's right there in Gatekeeper for you to use. But one final point I want to cover on this is obviously having that information in your repository probably is the most cool thing. Like Daniel mentioned, having that information at your fingertips is really useful for like other internal processes when people come to you asking for information about vendors. But obviously Gatekeeper is not just a vendor management system. There's also a big element of how to do things with contracts in there as well. And I'm just trying to remember the name of the contract that I had for Asana. I think it's this one. Yes, yeah, it's the one that Daniel created. So not just having the information available when you're doing vendor orientated processes, but in this workflow, you might have spotted the name was contract requested approval workflow. I'm taking Asana through negotiation for a hardware maintenance services agreement. And what one thing you'll see is based on information we collected during that vendor management process, we're able to present in this workflow form information such as the cybersecurity risk, the financial risk, and because we have TIN matching enabled here as well, we're able to Gatekeeper presents, the validity of the data that the vendor gave us when they provided their tax ID, and yeah, it means that not only do you have that data there just ready to use, but when you are interacting with the vendor in other processes, it's also there for you to be able to pull insights. So in this contract process, there's not really much to be aware of. I mean, they've got a really stable score in both of those risk thresholds, and they're an A and an A. But if they were, if they had very poor cybersecurity risk, or they were very financially unstable, that might be a scenario where it'd be useful to know that, so you can start making sure you're building in clauses and limits of liability when it comes to the contracts that you sign with them. But don't have to worry about that here.
Yeah, James, it's a really good point, right? And just going back to that first method of using the vendor portal, that self-registration, those market IQ checks and TIM matching happens automatically. So as soon as the vendor really puts their URL in or their email in, and the vendor record is created, it does all of those checks at that moment. It can instantly be shared across the entire organization. And we were talking, I think maybe earlier this week, and I was just saying like how useful that is in those sort of early commercial conversations. We're not quite, we're not sure yet if we want to absolutely work with the vendor. We just want to do some very quick and easy checks. It's such an easy way to do it. It takes no time at all. I mean, I can remember having to do sort of those early commercial checks with my vendors. And so, sometimes you can take days just going through company's house, going through a bunch of stuff just to try and find this information. You send a spreadsheet out, which maybe they have trouble accessing or whatever, right? There's so many issues with it. This is really, really useful. So I'm a really big fan of this. It's the kind of thing I wish I had actually when I was a customer, right? These are newer functionality within the vendor portal, but I absolutely love it.
And maybe we'll show that at the end if we get time, that self-registration where the vendor could connect their own like risk checks.
Absolutely.
So that by the time they make their way in, you've got the data, you've got the risk, and you've got any other documents that you decided to collect during vendor onboarding.
Yeah. And I just want to say, we are seeing the questions come in. We have loads to get through, and we may answer some of the questions as we're going. So we're just going to hold questions to the end. But if you do have questions, please use the Q&A, use the chat. I got my eyes across both. You'll probably see me dying across screen, just keeping on top of those. So we will get back to you either live on the session or we'll reach out afterwards. But James, was there anything else you wanted to show around perfect vendor data, or would you like to move on?
I think the other things will come up over the course of the rest. I'm really excited. I could spend ages on just this.
All right, let's go then. We'll move on because we're tight on time, and as you know, anyone who's joined James and I, we can get caught up on really cool stuff. But anyway, let's move on to the second ROI, and this is actually one where I, as a customer, saw very, very actionable ROI almost immediately. And we're going to be talking about automated processes for proactive risk management and compliance management here. So the vendor portal lets you create a lot of automations, right? So it's embedded within your workflows, but the beauty of Gatekeeper workflows is you can add certain phases that directly send information to your vendors via the vendor portal. And this could be requests for new tasks and things like that. So James showed, I think James, on the vendor portal, yeah, perfect. Just there, you can see there's the various tasks there for them to do on my open forms and even on my open events and even via messages. There's so much there that can happen via automations. So just keep that in mind. So I'm a big fan of that. And what we see here, right, is monitoring things such as certifications, accreditations, carrying out risk reviews, carrying out due diligence can be incredibly hard when you're not doing it through a central forum, right? That digital front door to your organization for your vendors. It's just they struggle to interact with you. They're either going to send you emails, they're going to update a spreadsheet, perhaps they send you their own spreadsheets or whatever, right? We've all been there. We've all seen the mess. You spend loads of time copying and pasting information. James alluded to that earlier, right? But there's just such an easy way to do it, and it's absolutely doing it this way, relying on Gatekeeper's workflows to build automations that directly send information here to the vendor portal. And this just really lets them stay on top of it. And when I say your vendors stay on top of all of their requirements with you. So there are several challenges that this vendor portal solves for. So the first one is relying on procurement, vendor management teams, and even like people like within your organization, such as InfoSec or risk, when you're trying to find out information from your vendors and maybe it's the due diligence around, their endpoint security. I'm just going to pick like the nerdiest thing I can remember there from InfoSec reviews, like something that I absolutely have no idea. Like sometimes your infosec teams, your risk teams will just get so annoyed, like they're not getting the feedback from the vendors that they want to go direct and stuff like that. This helps funnel all of those reviews into one place. And then, James already alluded to this, but reviewing, accessing, storing, and then keeping on top of, and we're going to get on top of that piece via file expiry workflows, all of your compliance documentation. So ISO certificates, SOC certificates, business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and to be honest, any document that you need from your vendor to show that they are working with you in a compliant way, and whether that's regulatory compliance, legislative compliance, or even just your vendor management policies, your procurement policies, things like that. And then James also already alluded to it somewhat when he showed off the contract process, but it can be really hard to understand your vendor's risk. It's a struggle to get that information. And as you see, like we can get that information super fast using the vendor portal as the means to create vendor records within the organization. So if you are experiencing any of these challenges, going from sort of that manual way of working with your vendors, removing the email, the spreadsheets and things like that could be a massive help, and creating that digital front door for your organization to work with all of your vendors is massive. And we're seeing a lot of really cool ROI figures come in from some of our customers at the moment. And it's always really exciting when you work in tech and you actually see the tech being used to help people manage all of this. So one of our customers seeing 75% of their time saved. This is a Gatekeeper admin, super expensive resource, and they no longer have to manually track all of this information. It's getting done in the background whilst they can go away and focus on other tasks. We can also speed up vendor onboarding, and we are consistently getting a number of 60% improvements there. And we're seeing that with customers who have quite long onboarding times already, something like 6 months. And I know there'd be people on this call that have experienced onboarding times way longer. I've seen ridiculously long onboarding times, but we also seen that with customers who already have a fairly fast onboarding process, 2 to 3 weeks. They're saving 60% on that onboarding time by using these automations and using vendor portal to help them there. And just this nice little stat I just wanted to call out here: 70% reduction in emails related to vendors or contracts. That's the beauty of having something like the vendor portal that funnels all of this communication and collaboration. So what this then enables you to do is like more of that meaningful work. You can get your vendors onboarded faster, so you can start working with them quicker. You're seeing more value with your vendors in a quicker time. Absolutely love that. And just less time spent in your inbox, in spreadsheets, in admin work, and more time just working with your vendors to create partnerships, performance management, contract management, those kinds of things. So absolutely love all of this. James, I'm going to hand it over to you to show. And I appreciate that this is kind of it for the context set in here. So I'm just going to leave James to pretty much run through with a lot more demos now. Now we've set the context.
Yeah, on that automation. I just want to say on that first one of the stats that you mentioned, that 75% reduction in or time saved on Gatekeeper on admin based on being able to automate things in Gatekeeper. One thing that occasionally we will ask customers is, can you calculate the ROI of that? And if they give us a set number of hours or an amount of their time, that can be very then easy to translate to like, well, how much are you paid? And if you're able to save this many hours a day, this many hours a week and month, you can very easily calculate how much actual money this is saving you. But I always think of you back when you were a customer, Daniel, that you said some of the stuff that you had to do manually, it's not just the time, it's just that it's not fun. It's like you aren't enjoying your job if you're just reading through spreadsheets being like, who have I got to email today and who have I got to chase tomorrow, and doing the boring admin stuff. So I think not just the time saved and the value of it, but the actual improvement in your life, because technology is doing the really boring stuff for you, is just as important. But I'm
James,
more concerned with that.
Genuinely a really good point. I think I went probably down from like 150, 200 emails a day from vendors, legal teams, and things like that, down to a handful at most. And most of the emails I did receive were just Gatekeeper notifications that I also routed through to my my email. So it's a really good point. I will talk to some of the personal ROIs that I experienced using Vendor Portal as a customer,
Yeah.
as James brings them up as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, James.
This next one I know is really resonates with you. So, for instance, we're on this screen,
Yeah.
compliance documentation, and you can see that these documents, that when we collected them, we stipulated the vendor had to give us expiration dates. So, ISO certificates are probably a good example because you might be collecting those from your IT vendors and things like that. And these have expiration dates. The one I'm going to be using, though, even though it's probably not the most popular compliance document you have to collect from your vendors, but it's the one that's expiring soon, is a modern slavery company policy. But one thing that you can see is that when a date like this approaches, you can build a workflow. And I'll go back to my workflows page to show you this one. And if you're a Gatekeeper savvy user, you'll know that a workflow that has this green lightning bolt is one that runs automatically. So I have a workflow here called the file expiry review. And so based on that expiration date of that modern slavery document approaching, Asana, the host vendor, was pulled onto the workflow, and that's when the vendor user is notified. So at no point does someone like Daniel have to be going through Gatekeeper and checking when are these expiring. He can if he's interested, but having a workflow like this puts that on autopilot. So that document we want replaced automatically gets created here as a card, and that vendor user gets notified. So you will have seen it in the vendor portal that I had a minute ago, but they also will get an email like this saying, there's a file expiring. It's coming from Gatekeeper saying, we have this file on record for you, your modern slavery document. It's coming up to expiration. Can you provide that new one for us? And it's the same thing again. They don't have to email it to their contact, and their contact has to chase them for it if it's late. It's just gets notified there. This view form link will take them into their portal, but I'm in an incognito window here, so I'll just open it up as if I'm already there. And once they're in their portal, they'll get a form here, file expiry review, where they can hit update, upload their new version. I just so happen to have a 2024 version, give a new date for that. So I'll say it expires next year, and then hit submit. And that's the end of the process there. So at no point did someone like Daniel have to be aware of like, oh, I need to chase this, or I need to like make sure the vendor manager is reaching out on our behalf to go and collect that. It's just there's a process. If Daniel was interested, he would be able to see that the process had started, and he'd be able to see how far it was through, like if the vendor had accessed it and if they'd uploaded it. But all that was required was the process initiated, which Gatekeeper did on its own. The card is then submitted, and in this workflow, and this is our best practice template again, we're going to be showing a couple of those today. There is a final step for someone, at least someone, and I think it's the internal vendor manager here. It might even be you. Oh no, it's Andy, to review that the version that's been uploaded is one that we want to accept. And when they've checked it, there's the new version, there's the new date. They can hit update and they can save. And then when I go back to that vendor record, which I think I've closed that tab, but I'll open it up again. When they go back to the vendor record in compliance docs, there's our new modern slavery file. Expires next year now, and there's the newest version. But if I want to, I can go back and look at historically uploaded versions by different parties. So that's just an example of ways that if you do have these documents that you need, and we do get quite a lot of stories of our customers that they're only allowed to have certain vendors on site if they provided these accreditations. So they're only allowed to contract with these sets of contractors that meet certain thresholds and attach to keep these documents up to date. If you want to make sure that you have that, like Daniel mentioned, list of pre-approved vendors that you're ready to work with, and if your business comes to you, you can be like, yep, these are all up to date. Having something like this run automatically is just, it's a no-brainer if you're collecting this documentation in Gatekeeper.
Yeah, James, I know you alluded to it, that I was a big fan of this
Yep.
this feature. And the reason, and I might have to speak slightly anecdotally here, but there's maybe 4 people in the supply management team that I worked in, and the feedback pre-Gatekeeper was 10 to 20 hours per week chasing from our vendors via emails, from calls. And it kind of is so baffling, right? Like how much time was being spent. We rolled this out via the vendor portal and instantly cut pretty much all of that chasing. The only bit, James, that you just rightly mentioned was needing to review that bit. And there's probably a small percentage, maybe up to 5% of vendors that occasionally would still be incredibly slow. And they were vendors that we were aware of that we had issues with, which anyway gave us fuel to consolidate where necessary. And it automated the escalations to them. But yeah, this was an absolute game changer. It's such a simple one, but it freed up so much time that the team could actually then go and manage their vendors. They were genuinely trapped in a cycle of compliance, especially with maybe like up to 300 different vendors that we absolutely had to do this for contractually for our customers and under various regulations that were flowed down to us. So I see this as an absolute win, and it saves so much time. This is actually, out of all of the stuff that we did with Gatekeeper, one of the absolute successes in the team. The one thing they kept saying was like, just made their lives better and let them do more meaningful work. So yeah, awesome. Yeah, James, and is there anything else you wanted to show on this one?
I just want to show the other half of that example. So replacing compliance documentation, especially if you're in a really regulation heavy industry like Daniel was, it was finance. I think that was where you were really under the cosh with having to make sure that you kept those up to date, but not just keeping documentation up to date. But one thing that I want to call out as well is assessments and re-reviews. So one thing, I think Rich mentioned this on a webinar that he appeared in with us, didn't he, Daniel, where he's talked to a lot of prospects when he's speaking about Gatekeeper, and a lot of the time they say they'll do an onboarding and they'll do some risk assessments when they deal with a vendor, but that's it. They onboard,
It's the
they
point in
do the
time
risk
checks,
assessments.
right?
Yeah, they onboard them once and then maybe and do risk assessments at that point. And then maybe when it comes time to renewal, they'll do some checks, but that's it. Like very rarely will there be ongoing reassessments. But if you have critical vendors and if you're industry regulated where you need to be on top of this, then you need something that not only keeps documents up to place, but up to speed, but can be doing the same thing for, assessment forms and so on. So on the other side of having this workflow, I've got basically a similarly very small but identical-ish process for annual InfoSec reviews. And I'm not going to show you filling it out here, but basically the scenario is exactly the same. That Atlassian, this vendor that's a software vendor of ours, and I'm just going to jump into its smart form, had its review dates come up, and this can be seen as the next review date come up, which can be seen as the exact same as an expiration date on a document. And the same thing can happen based on that date approaching. The card can trigger on, let the vendor know that we need them to complete a reassessment, and they'll fill out information around the GDPR, security processes, data management, and so on. And not only is and you could have documents in here as well, to be fair, but not only is the documentation being kept up to date then, but actual usable, tangible data that you might want. And the reason I really wanted to show this is because this regular reassessments of vendor of due diligence forms like this lend themselves really well to our smart forms feature, which came out in June, I think, this year. Was it, Daniel?
Yeah, June
Because
time.
not only can you collect that data, so you have up-to-date information around like vendor due diligence and compliance and so on, but also you can decide what for us is a good value and what for us are good thresholds. So you can start building up a picture over time, like, is this vendor improving? Are they consistently meeting our standards? And a bit like Daniel said there, like if you have a vendor that is consistently underperforming, that might be a scenario where you can make the business case for consolidation or finding a new partner there. But hopefully not. Hopefully you have vendors that look like this that regularly are in your green threshold for when they're completing their reassessments. The same thing can take place on these workflows, just as they can in file replacements. But I just wanted to call that out because it's something that you can do without just only onboarding the vendor and then never reassessing them again.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the way the vendor portal is built, that initial screen that they go to, James, do you want to just go back to the vendor portal? I appreciate it's in your other window. It's so basic for them to use, right? They need very little guidance. We have guidance that we can provide every single user there to help you with this. But what I've found and what our customers find that are using vendor portal is that it just becomes the way in which your vendors start to interact with you, especially those ones that you work with over a long period of time, you've built those partnerships with. There's really no objections. You always get a minority of vendors that are just awkward. No matter what you send them, they don't want to do it. They don't want to complete it. They don't want to access the system. They don't want to email you. They don't want to complete a spreadsheet. You're always going to get those. But what we found is this is really good. A really good way to encourage proactive relationship management with your vendors. And yeah, it's really quite wonderful to see that. So think about it as more than just like a tool here. It's really helping with those relationships. And James, just talking about collaboration and pieces like that, shall we go on to messaging, collaboration, and all of that good stuff? Because we have just mentioned that there's loads of cool stuff that they can do. They've got this. The vendor user has this dashboard here where they come in and work on contract obligations, perhaps via My Open Events. They can work or give updates on SLAs. They may have quarterly business reviews put in and they're aware of where they are there. There's loads of cool stuff there, but it'd be really good to have a bit of a demo here to see actually how do we make use of these collaboration features within the vendor portal.
Well, there's a few different ways, and some of them in this vendor user's profile they've already sort of got underway. So, for instance, I mean, the forms themselves are very easy to collaborate on. So, like you said there, if they access this hub, anything that is with them to do, they'll be able to access and get started on. So, for instance, the not much going on here because I've submitted all these forms now, and
It's good
over
to
the
see
course
though.
of this webinar, yeah, that there's not really much waiting on them. There's this form here, but I'll talk about that when we get to self vendor or self managing and self enablement in a second. But one thing that they can do is collaborate with their own colleagues. So, for instance, what you might want to do, and this is fairly typical for a lot of Gatekeeper customers in Vendor Portal, is there will be generally a relationship manager from the vendor that can deal with most of the discussions that take place when you're onboarding them or when you're dealing in the contracting side and the actually purchasing their services and so on. But and this is the case for Gatekeeper as well. If it comes to filling out complex due diligence assessments, and I'm annoyed that I've submitted this one now because it had GDPR sections in it. So we'll have to just cast our minds back to that being there. It might be the case that the relationship manager isn't equipped to answer the more technical stuff. Like you mentioned, Daniel, endpoint security. If I was a software vendor, I might need input from my CTO to answer that. So one area that I can very easily just enable collaboration, not just between me and the party that owns this vendor portal, but me and my own colleagues, is when I'm logged in here, if I need help from my CTO, like I've got this GDPR form that needs filling out or needs tech specs of the services we offer, I can hit add manage contacts, I think was it? Add contacts, sorry. And here I'm able to see who's already in the vendor portal on behalf of our organization. We've got 2 users, but if I want to, I can add someone new. So let me see if your name works here, Daniel. Actually, we'll go live and see if it picks you up with auto build. See if I go Daniel at Gatekeeper. Do
My
you
email's
have?
wrong there. It's Daniel.be. But
Oh
it
no,
pulled
that
through
that one works. You
somehow.
must have
Apparently,
Daniel. Yeah,
apparently I
yeah.
have that email. Yeah.
So this is showing that hint of that auto build feature that I mentioned earlier, that based on publicly available information around the organization taken from the URL here, Gatekeeper can actually extract who the person is. It's your old job title though, so it's only a few months out of date. But yeah, so you're able to put in that email address, select their permissions, and then I can invite you in to this vendor portal to help collaborate on the same forms that we're all working on. So that's the easy way to collaborate at managing users. But one thing that, and I've got a few of these open on this dashboard, one of the interesting points is messages. So for instance, and I'm going to jump over to the contracting side here because we're talking a lot about vendor orientated processes, which obviously makes sense for vendor portal, but I just want to call back to that point earlier around having good vendor interaction when it comes to the contract side as well, is when it comes to communications, again, having to do those via email and then via maybe if you're sharing documents with them via like OneDrive and then via Slack or then going back to email and finding different threads might be a bit of a pain. So in this contract that we looked at earlier, where there were discussions taking place, this one, for instance, is sort of towards the end of the negotiations where terms have been agreed, but it hasn't been signed yet. And just alongside this contract that's being onboarded, it could be the term executed is the right word, isn't it, Daniel? There's a conversation here where where the internal user, so that's me in this case, James Ince, is interested in adding an extra line item for a new feature to the contract. So you can see they've just been able to go hi and then tagged a user from the vendor. And they've also tagged a second one just for reference. Just say, can you add an additional line item to this? Because we might want to look at building that into our order form there. And same as before, I'm jumping around a bit, but same as before, Gatekeeper can notify them via email, and that will give them the option to just follow that straight into the portal. And let me just follow that link address over here, follow that straight into the portal, open up the card and open up the message thread so they can attach any documents that, have been requested of them, quote for an extra feature. Here you go. And instantly that makes its way into that conversation there. So if anyone else is looking at that contract, maybe someone later in the process is about to approve it, they not only get the information of, the initial contract request, but they can instantly see, let me go back to the workflow just to round this off. They can instantly see not only the information, like I said, that's gone on the workflow, like the basic information around the contract, they can see conversations that have taken place like, oh, I want to know why there's an extra line item been added. Oh, I can see that this person asked for it. and this was the initial quote that was provided there. So whereas if that was taking place outside of Gatekeeper, and then the negotiations were taking place in a different app, and then there were message threads that not everyone was on because they were in different emails, keeping that, knowledge centrally would be almost impossible. So it's just an easy way to, not only just on vendor orientated processes, but on contract ones too. If you're using vendor portal, and like Daniel said, and they're not one of those people that are just averse to trying new software tools, they'll be very, very easily persuaded that they can go in and just attach documents and, discuss things in message threads with you with very little effort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. James, I'm super conscious of time, and
Oh yeah.
I kind of wanted at this point to go on to what I think is an underused dashboard, which is the vendor dashboard, vendor portal dashboard.
I agree.
Sorry, to get it spot on, because for me, as someone who effectively was having to have that bird's eye view over all of our vendors, their compliance status, contract obligations, what just in general, what, are there any issues with vendors, things like that? Yeah, it was super painful. So it'd be really cool to showcase that in a moment.
Sure. So if you do have vendor portal admins, so people who should be able to oversee like all vendor interactions via Gatekeeper, you can set them up here in the modules area. That's just an FYI if you haven't considered adding those and you already have the vendor portal. But once you give that permission to a user, they'll get a new dashboard in the standard Gatekeeper dashboards view. And from here, they'll be able to see all of their processes that involve vendors, not only like all of the Kanban boards, but all of the actual open forms that are with vendors in this one view. And I have quite a lot in this environment, so I'm going to scroll past these ones. But then once they also carry on going, they'll be able to see any events that the vendors have submitted to them to review. So like if they are doing SLA reviews and they've submitted their data as part of that event, this will come through here, but also any messages. So again, like Daniel said, if the vendors are comfortable using that as their hub for raising issues with you, raising queries, discussing what's going on. As a vendor portal admin, you don't have to, again, have like a separate mailbox or like auto forward things or make sure you're checking this email inbox and this one. You can use the central messages hub here and ignore some of these test ones, but you can use the central messages hub here to make sure those discussions are being fielded by you or one of the other vendor portal admins. Without needing to, again, leave Gatekeeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for me, I was always thinking about, how do we make improvements? So one of those is like, how can we embed the vendor portal into as many vendor processes as possible? We can see a snapshot here of every workflow that is linked to the vendor portal, where it'll be asking the vendors to come collaborate, to provide information, data, documentation. So that's really cool. But I just like the open forms one, actually, James, the one just below, because, anyone that's trying to run a multitude of various different vendor projects, anyone in a management position will understand, like, just having that snapshot of like, where are we at with various statuses. You're probably being asked by various people in your organization for status updates, things like that. This just gives you an incredible snapshot of that. So really big fan of it. And James, actually, you made a really interesting point. Like when we have information trapped in emails, especially individual emails, as opposed to, say, like a procurement mailbox or a vendor management mailbox, which still are problematic to manage and assign priorities to. This just gives a really cool overview of all the conversations happening with regards to any vendor who's collaborating through that vendor portal. So yeah, I think it's cool that you can add, a select number of admins that are trusted to see everything. Super useful. But yeah, I think this is, as a user of the vendor portal, this was just great. It really helped manage everything way better across all of our vendors.
Yeah.
Awesome. James, was there anything else you wanted to show on that one? I'm aware we've got about 9 minutes left. And we do
9
want to
minutes.
show.
No, then.
All right, let tell you what, let's cover this next section. This is number 4, vendor enablement and self-started forms. This is a relatively new one. And actually, James, I think you were a bit of a pioneer internally around this. We're seeing a number of customers using this. But do you want to just give the breakdown in maybe like a few minutes and just explain why this is awesome?
Sure. I'll try and keep it real brief because, like you said, only 9 minutes left. Okay, so standardized schedule processes, perfect. Like automated, great, takes that admin work away. Standard onboarding processes, yeah, you should absolutely have those in place. But obviously, some things that you need to do with vendors will just be ad hoc. Like vendors will come to you or should come to you with, I have this request or I have this change that you need to be made aware of. And this sort of goes back to what you said, Daniel, about perfect data. You need to make sure that what you're working with is kept up to date so that when you have requests come in from internal teams or you need to run reports, you're not second guessing, like, is this out of date? Is this incorrect? So one workflow we have here, and this is a best practice template for Vendor Portal again, is called the company update request form. And this is the use case I'll explain, or maybe give a few more examples of once I've explained this one, but this is the simplest, most distilled down version of how this can be applied. So for any vendors that we've onboarded, this workflow will present itself to them in the vendor portal. Let me close out of this message so you can see what I mean. Just refresh my page. Oh, will present itself to vendor users in the vendor portal as an available form that they can start at any point. And you might guess this by the name, but because it's called the vendor portal update request form, the scenario here is maybe something about the vendor has changed. Like maybe they've changed their registered address, or like Gatekeeper itself, maybe they've changed their limited company name. And they'll want to make sure that you have that updated in your run records, so that, you know, when you issue any future contracts to them, or, you know, go through any more payments, it's not held up by, oh, we forgot to tell you about this, we need to go and talk to other departments to correct everything that's gone wrong. So in this vendor user, James Asana in this case, if he notes that the customer here needs to have that data updated, he can go in, hit update this form, give some details about what's changed, and I'll just say name. I'm just going to do this quickly because I'm aware of time. Name has changed. He'll say it's now Asana Limited, which I've spelled wrong. Asana Limited. He'll hit submit. And a bit like the file expiry workflow, this doesn't automatically commit that change, because what you do want is to go with the perfect data. You need to make sure you've got control of it. So in this workflow, for instance, was it this one? Yeah. Now that the user has submitted that, it still goes to an internal team to validate that the change that is submitted is one that we want to publish to the repository. So when I hit update, I'll be able to see that he changed Asana Inc. to Asana Limited based on this modify icon, letting me know that's changed. I'll be able to hit update, and then that will finish this workflow, which is taking a second, but that will finish this workflow. And I'll go back to the vendor portal because this should automatically update. Yep, there we go. That one's finished, but Gatekeeper immediately creates a new one for any point in future where the same sort of thing happens again. You're basically enabling the vendor user to self-manage the data they have in your portal, so that you're not having to manually put that task on your vendor managers. Sorry, I think I need a drink, Daniel. Hold on.
No, that's all right. I'll take over because no, like you say, James, the ad hoc request management is one where it can be very time consuming, and you can put all your efficiencies, automations in the world there. So yeah, absolutely. And we have just got a question from Sylvia to say, wouldn't a business name change initiate a contract update as well to the party? Yes, absolutely. Yes. And there'd be various ways as well. Like for something like that, we can actually tie in or trigger a contract review workflow. We're just trying to keep the example fairly
that was a bad
basic.
example. That was a very irresponsible change from
it was James. Absolutely. But like the way I would also want to use this is like, oh, if the vendor, you know, has new opportunities to work with us, sees new opportunities there. If there's just any you know, like you say, ad hoc, you know, just like you're never surprised with what comes up from your vendors. Just a super easy way to communicate. But yeah, James, that was awesome. I do just quickly want to cover this last point, but James, can you just run the poll just in the background, just while we'll just move it to one side. So what we're about to cover now is a little bit more on reporting. We did cover a little bit earlier when we actually showed you the vendor portal dashboard. But James, do you want to show a few bits off there? I also just want to check, just to confirm a couple of bits. We're probably not going to get to all these questions live. We'll get back to you after the event as well, just to make sure we've got all those questions. We can include them in the email comms after this.
Please do submit them if you have any in your head before the end, and if you were in our smart forms webinar, what you'll see is what we do when we upload these recordings to make them on demand on the knowledge base. If there are questions in there that we didn't get to over the course of it, we try to answer those in the knowledge base article as well. So for instance, after the smart forms one, I even recorded some content, like some video walkthroughs to address the stuff we didn't have time to fit in. So yeah, if you do have questions, please throw them in, and we'll, even if we don't cover them right today, they'll be addressed in due time. Reporting, was it you said, Daniel? Yeah.
Yes, please. Okay. I think you were going to show briefly the card age report.
Yes. Right before I get to that one, though, I just want to show that this is a small one, just that some of you, if you are interested in your vendor interactions, might be wanting to see that if you do have lots of vendor users in, what you can do from this vendor users report is just see, like, are they active? Have they logged in? when did they last log in. So for instance, if you see pending or no access, you'll know that they've never accessed the Gatekeeper environment. And if you see pending, that means that you've invited them and they haven't accepted their invitation. So this is just a very easy view for those people that, again, might have the vendor portal dashboard and need to oversee what's going on with all these different processes. Another view where they might be interested in who's being added to our vendor portal. Have they logged in recently? So can I assume that they're reading the forms that we're sending them to complete and things like that? But yeah, I just wanted to quickly cover that before we go to card age, because the card age is the juicier report, I guess. And yeah, like some of you might already use this report just for tracking KPIs and like time to onboard or time to execute for other Gatekeeper processes. But with the card age report, it's really cool, the graphics you get. So when you come here, what you can do is filter it from all of your workflows. So you can see all cards that are ongoing to your specific vendor orientated ones. So for instance, in this case, if I look at my vendor onboarding workflow and I change it to say the last 3 months of cards that have gone through, I haven't been onboarding that many vendors in this environment, as you can see. One thing it gives you is the SLA. So like what you can assume is like the deadline you set for each phase is this red marker that no bar should be really going above. And the blue bar here gives you the average days it takes for each of these phases to complete. And the reason that you can use this is obviously you can use it from an end to end to say how long is it taking us to onboard our vendors. And I can compare, how long is it taking the last 3 months, but also how long is a specific task, like how long are vendors taking to complete their onboarding form? How long is the onboarding review taking? I can look at those and then I can change the period to say, rather than just the last 3 months, I might go back to 1st of Jan and rerun this report. And I can see that over the course of the year, it's taken 8 days on average, but the last quarter is down to 1. So I can see that maybe something I've changed about the process is improving that time to execution or time to onboard in this case. So this is a really useful view for just getting that time orientated information, so that if you are making changes to your processes, if you're building in new forms, if you're making things more conditional and dynamic, you'll be able to very easily say, well, this is how long it was taking a year ago. This is how long it's taking now. Or, how maybe there are things that we should identify in here. So for instance, onboarding review seems consistently to be taking longer than the 14-day deadline. Maybe there's some sort of bottleneck that's being created there that we need to change about our process. Similar to the vendor onboarding form itself. If it's taking longer than your SLA time, then maybe there's something that is wrong with the form, or you're not managing the vendor relationship appropriately and giving them everything they need to complete that there. So yeah, card age report is really useful reporting, especially for those vendor management processes, so that they're not taking, how long do you say it was, Daniel? 6 months that we had some of our customers before they had a structured workflow for it.
That's it. And to be honest, I've worked in organizations where I've gone in first when everyone's doing it manual ways, and it's been scarily worse than that. So I've lived and breathed trying to rectify that issue there for sure.
Cool.
Awesome.
So yeah, they're the two I wanted to cover. And I mentioned smart forms earlier because I wanted to make sure we got to it over the course of the webinar, that if you do have ongoing vendor assessments that you want to be collecting, building that into a smart form is a must, because you're able to then not just have the data to assess it like as it is, but you're able to build up a report over time to see the consistency and the performance there.
Yeah, and I think the point around that is like embed that vendor portal element into that process for smart forms, and you're going to get way more data, way more responses from your vendors. So it's super useful. James, we've just gone a little bit over. We've not quite got to all the questions. We're not going to, but I have just spent a few minutes getting back to as many of you as possible. If you have any questions, please add them either to chat or to Q&A. We're taking note of those. We'll get back to you after. But James, was there anything else you wanted to mention around this? Otherwise, we'll let everyone go, and we're just about on time. Sorry we didn't quite get to a decent Q&A. Maybe we'll make the next one an hour and 15 minutes when we're doing a run through like this.
That's a good idea. No, but you have our emails. It's James and Daniel at gatekeeperhq.com. So if you do have any questions that maybe come to you later, or if you wake up in the middle of the night with like, oh damn, I wish I'd asked that, by all means forward them on, and Daniel and I'll be able to help you out with those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just my last passing point, and actually it was one of our customers that noted it, which is the vendor portal has become an absolute essential for vendor onboarding. And it's been quite a heavy vendor onboarding and vendor management session, but it just makes that whole process just infinitely easier, simpler, more automated, more responses. And we're in an increasingly regulated space. regulated world. Our supply chains are at times terrifying, underperforming, overwhelming, breaking. So it's great. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it as a former customer and now someone that works at Gatekeeper. So yeah, awesome. Appreciate it, everyone. We'll let you all go. Thanks again for coming back. Well, we're seeing regular people every month now. It's amazing to see you all. Hopefully we can meet in person one day and share a drink together or something cool. But until then, yeah, see you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.